Next, we're going to sort of take a look at populating historic data. And that is an issue that many people have with their model. And before we look at sort of why that issue happens and how we might fix it, let's first have a quick chat about what does a model generally need to reflect the past. So the majority of models of this kind are pretty standard three-statement models. You have your cash flow, your profit and loss, and your balance sheets. And the general thing that you're looking for the model to try and do is have some historic data overwrite the forecast values the model thought it was calculating, because in reality, this is what has actually happened. You can most simply do that by essentially having a set of pro forma statements that match the format of the model. So for every line of your cash flow, you have a corresponding line on your actuals cash flow where you put your data. But there are some problems with that approach, and we'll go over why that is in a minute and how we might get around them. Just to say that there are a few other things you need to make sure you consider when building a model like this. Most notably inflation and how that's doing. It's currently not doing too well, so probably important to get that in your model, as it's probably a little different to what you thought it was going to be last year. So if you have any cash flows that are dictated specifically by an index, then it's good to make sure that index is kept up to date. And generally anything to do with tax balances in your model, both tax losses, so if you have any taxable losses you can use and what categories they might be in, and also any sort of tax depreciation balances you have, because they might differ from your accounting ones. It's important to make sure they're considered correctly. So why is this such a big problem? And I think the general sort of issue that people have is there's a huge mismatch between the data, the form of the data the model needs, and the form of the data that they have. This can happen for a multitude of reasons, but generally it comes down to the fact that the model hasn't been set up to take the data that you have. Often we see people convert financial close models into operating models under the assumption that will be easy. And a good thing to do, and it's a thing that generally we'd recommend against. And we can sort of see here why this mismatch is occurring. Generally, in most financial models, the thing people consider the most is the cash flow. The cash flow is going to be very detailed, where all the money's coming from, where it's going. And the profit and loss and balance sheet are still going to be in there, and they're going to be correct, but they're generally not looked at as much in the sort of project finance world. And generally, that's not going to be one of the main outputs of the model. You compare that to the format of what accounting data you'll generally have. It's generally going to be given to you by an accounting team, and they think about things much more in terms of trial balances, in terms of having quite detailed items of profit and loss and balance sheet, balances on your balance sheet. But the cash flow is often sort of an afterthought on that side. It's just going to be a couple of cash balances in there, and everything else you're sort of left to infer. And that essentially means you have far too much detail about things that you don't care about very much, and not enough detail about things that you do, which leaves you thinking that you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Now, there are things you can do about this. It's always like a little difficult. You can't have a perfect crystal ball that looks ahead and knows exactly what the format everything's going to be. So you need to make sure that any solution that you build has some flexibility. But in general, most approaches that we would advocate for look something like this. And the solution is therefore to amend, or pay someone else to amend your model so that the inputs match the form of the data that you have. So this is how we would do it in what we'd call a trial balance interface. And the main advantage of this is that although it's probably quite a tedious process using it the first time, once you've programmed it once, every time you come back to your model in the next sort of quarter or month, however often it is you update your modeling, then it remembers what you've done. How does it work? So we can sort of see here, the idea is that your trial balances are going to come out of your accounting software, and you're going to have a list of hundreds of balances with different sorts of codes. We sort of got an advantage here, example here. Account one is a cash account, account three is a disarray. And essentially, the first time you use an interface like this, you need to sit down and tell the interface what that actually means in the model's language. Account one means X, account two means Y, and you go through. And once you've done that, as I say, the model will then remember next time you come to do it that this is what all of these trial balance codes mean. And that has the advantage of meaning that then once you've done it, you can essentially just paste your trial balance into this interface, and it will automatically identify everything is. If there's a couple of new things, it will alert you that you need to tell them what the new things are. And then essentially you sort of sum up everything into a set of data that is much more tractable and usable by the model because it's given in the terms the model is expecting. That is quite easy to do for the profit and loss and balance sheet, because, as I say, that's probably going to be the format of the trial balances you're given. The one sort of extra tricky thing you might have to do is use these balances and these profit and loss items to infer a cash flow. Again, it's sort of probably a bit tricky the first time you do it, but once you've done it once, you've essentially done the last sort of step of not just having the model calculate your profit and loss and balance sheet in terms the model understands, but also your cash flow in terms the model understands. If you don't have the want or the budget to do this entirely sort of formal interface process, we'd still recommend a similar sort of thing as like a helper spreadsheet you can just create yourself. So just have a helper spreadsheet that maybe doesn't do all of this for you, but just sort of writes down, this is what all these trial balances are, because half the battle is also remembering what they are every 3 months. Some of them are pretty obvious. Some of them you have to sort of remember which place they should live in the model. You want to make sure that's consistent. Otherwise, things might move about very oddly. So if you don't sort of want to go the sort of the full whole hog, as it were, and build a full interface, having some sort of helper spreadsheet that still has this account code key is a very helpful thing to do. If you don't want to do any modeling changes at all, you're probably going to have to start taking a more pragmatic approach in your modeling, and that's fine. And that means you just need to know what matters so that you can just focus on that. We would say sort of the 3 key elements to focus on in your modeling is making sure all the cash balances are correct in the model. So how much money you have in the bank, how much money you owe the bank, how much money people owe you, how much you owe other people. Some of those people are going to be HMRC or your local friendly tax authority, and they get a bit more moody if you don't pay them. So having sort of those balances in the model is incredibly important, and is also not too difficult, right? These are the sort of balances that are going to be quite easy for you to check. You know your asset, you know how much money you have for everything. So these things are going to be quite easy to check that they're correct. Lots of models come with audit tests, or at least lots of good models come with audit tests, and our models are no different. And not all audit tests are created equal. If there are only 3 audit tests, you should sort of focus on fixing and getting working. Obviously, in an ideal world, you'd have them all work, but if they're not all going to work, I would say the 3 ones you want to make sure consistently work are: does your balance sheet balance? Because if imbalances and that imbalance changes over time, that suggests something's gone badly wrong. And does the net movement on your cash flow and the net movement on your profit and loss match the movements reported on your balance sheet? If those 3 things are correct, I'm not going to sit here and say your model is correct, because that would not be a very responsible auditor of me. But it certainly means that something's not gone catastrophically wrong, and especially in the first periods. And again, we're just trying to focus on what matters. The final thing to look at, it sounds pretty obvious, but it's a good thing to sort of keep an eye on anyway, is remembering that your model is going to have some key outputs. In the case of lots of operating models, it could be a debt service cover ratio or other such debt ratios. There may be some other things you need to report, but ensuring that those are correct, at least in the early few periods. Again, it's just sort of focusing on what is going to become a matter and become immediately apparent in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. You're going to have a feeling of what you think the sort of debt service cover ratio in your model should be. So ensuring that that's roughly correct and the constituents of it, the CFADs and the debt service, is roughly correct as well. If you do that, then you know that your model's not going to be too far away.